Hello there. I am the Midnight Time Traveler, and unfortunately for me, we're traveling back to the trenches of World War I today. I know you may be using this video to fall asleep, so before that, make sure to like the video and subscribe. Also, where are you from, and what time are you watching? Would you survive as a soldier during World War I? Now, get comfortable, relax, and let's begin. I open my eyes to a sour odor that reminds me of onions forgotten in a cellar. And for a moment, I cannot decide whether the sting in my nose comes from the smell or from a drifting pocket of gas that nobody bothered to mention. Water shivers on the duckboards below, and when I shift my weight, the plank yields with a weary groan, sending a thin ribbon of mud across my sleeve. Above the parapet, the stars are faint pinpricks, but a robin somewhere behind the reserve line gives a single experimental chirp, a lone musician testing the hall before the concert begins. I listen for the familiar artillery thunder that defined the night, yet the darkness holds its breath as if reluctant to wake. Somewhere beyond the horizon, a rumble stirs, neither thunder nor shellfire, more like an ancient beast clearing its throat in irritation. But then it fades again, and silence resumes. A private crouches near the fire step, rubbing his hands briskly. Although everyone knows a fire is forbidden this close to the line. The eagle on his collar disc identifies him as American infantry, and the name stenciled on his pack reads Harvey. The letters are blurred by damp, as if the trench itself conspires to erase individuality, folding every man into a single anonymous figure clothed in mud. I whisper, asking if morning has come, though my tone carries little conviction. Harvey snorts and mutters, "Morning is what they call it. Back at headquarters, sir." Out here it is just the moment the rats decide to clock out. As if summoned by his words, a thick-furred rat scurries along the fire step with practiced grace, its belly brushing the plank. It vanishes into a crevice between two sagging sandbags, the true veteran of this war, and I cannot help thinking that when nations have spent their wrath and treaties gather dust, the rats will inherit what remains of France. I pat the pocket that holds my notebook, reassured by its dry weight. The pages inside wait like silent jurors, ready to record every fact and absurdity I encounter. Observation is my mission, yet the Springfield rifle leaning nearby serves as an awkward reminder that in this place even witnesses may be drafted into the play. My musings are interrupted by a lanky corporal who appears from the traverse with a clipboard under his arm and a smudge of something, possibly chocolate, on his cheek. His message is short: gas alert, ended an hour ago. Masks off, but stay alert. He passes along like a migrating bird, repeating his refrain in the next bay. I peel my mask from my face and draw the heavy air into my lungs, tasting the sharp mixture of damp earth, cordite, and something faintly metallic. The trench behind us gleams with puddles, and a buried communication wire hums faintly underfoot when trodden upon, as if complaining about its thankless duty of carrying words through a world that has no room for them. Breakfast arrives, not with ceremony, but in the form of a battered mess, tin thrust into my hand by Harvey. "Special for today," he says, with a grin that contains more gallows humor than cheer. Cold coffee, yesterday's bacon, and a spoonful of optimism. I ask whether seconds of optimism are available, and he replies that there is always plenty left over, sir. The bacon is gray at the edges, but still bears the ghost of smoke, and I chew it slowly as the bitter coffee slides down like a reprimand. It is not delicious, but it is warm, and warmth feels like a small but vital rebellion against this place. Behind us, a harmonica begins to wrestle with over there. The tune wavers, bending under cold fingers, yet no one objects. Even mangled music reassures us that a world of melody persists beyond the wire. A runner hurries by carrying a pigeon crate. His boots skid on the slick duckboards, and for a moment both man and bird teeter on the edge of calamity. He recovers at the last instant and offers me a grimace. "This fellow," he mutters, jerking a thumb toward the crate, "has more flight hours than I ever will." His remark earns a tired chuckle from Harvey, who adjusts his puttees with meticulous care, as if the right fold of cloth might coax order from chaos. Stand 2 approaches with the inevitability of sunrise. Boots slam onto the firing step. Rifles rise. Bayonets catch what little light filters through the mist. I join the line without anyone asking for my name. The sky grows paler, trading charcoal for bruised gray, while thin threads of fog curl upward from craters in front of the wire. For 10 eternal minutes we stare across no man's land, waiting for a signal that never comes. When the sergeant finally lowers his clipboard and murmurs, "Stand down to ready," I feel a surge of relief, so strong it almost shames me. We live for these moments when nothing happens, when the machinery of war forgets to grind for an hour. I scrawl in my notebook, 0 hour plus dawn, rain ceased, morale cautiously upright, visibility 20 yards, rats operating under ceasefire. Harvey peers at my notes and demands that I add, "Stu promised, forenoon." Mark it down so the historians can laugh when it does not arrive. I oblige, wondering if future readers will indeed laugh or only wince. The sun creeps toward its reluctant zenith, a wide disk dulled by haze and cordite, and at last the rumor of stew proves true. 2 cooks in grease-stained aprons arrive with petrol tins balanced on a splintered plank, steam curling from the lids in dreamy spirals, a sight so miraculous that conversation stalls in mid-sentence. Men queue along the duckboards, helmets held out like begging bowls, and when the ladle plunges, it returns with a brew the color of wet clay, thick with barley and scraps of bully beef that drift like weary barges. I taste pepper, perhaps even a hint of oregano borrowed from a rear area kitchen, and I record the moment because flavor here is as rare as leaves on these shattered trees. Behind the feeding line, a corporal posts the latrine rota, a duty universally dreaded, yet essential to survival. Shallow pits lie beyond the communication trench, screened by salvaged doors nailed together in a rough fence, and we rotate through them to keep contagion at bay. My turn falls immediately after the meal. I shoulder a spade that once served a Nebraska farm and follow 2 privates who pass the time reciting baseball scores from last season, their nostalgia so vivid that for a heartbeat I can almost smell popcorn instead of nitrate-soaked soil. At the latrine, we lime the pits, sprinkle disinfectant, and stamp the planks back into place, all while dodging enemy snipers who know exactly where these chores occur. 1 round snaps past with a lazy whine, burying itself in the mud. A private named O'Leary lifts the spent bullet a moment later and pockets it, promising to mount it on a watch chain if luck permits him a watch again. On the walk back, we pass a field telephone post where a signalman argues with static that crackles like frying fat. He invites me to listen. Somewhere in the fizz and pop, a voice demands sandbags for Sector G, complains that ducks have taken up residence in trench drains, and requests more mosquito netting for the infirmary, which I find wonderfully optimistic, given the artillery flies that outnumber any insect. I jot it down, noting that every army believes its requisition form will reach heaven faster if shouted loudly enough. Just then, Sergeant Barnes appears, mustache bristling with what might be soup, and orders a working party to retrieve coils of concertina wire abandoned in a forward crater. He adds that anyone who brings back a coil unbroken will earn a rum ration tonight. The promise draws volunteers as honey draws bees, for trench rum is the closest thing to courage in bottled form. We snake through the sap again, this time burdened by wire that glints like malicious ivy. The crater lies 30 yards beyond the parapet, large enough to swallow a cart, its rim spattered with frozen clods that still carry the imprint of an exploding 8-inch shell. While two men wrestle the coil, I crouch on the lip, scanning through a trench periscope whose mirror is flecked with dried blood, a souvenir from its previous owner. Across the churned earth, I spot German helmets bobbing behind their own breastwork, distant yet close enough that I can read the nervous set of shoulders, a universal dialect of fatigue. Without warning, our artillery roars alive. 4 guns at the rear loose a sequence that thuds in my chest before it touches my ears. We flatten instinctively as shells screech overhead, their paths invisible yet felt in the gut. Earth geysers rise along the enemy line, torn sandbags spinning upward like startled pigeons. At once, the German reply crashes in, heavier, deliberate, probing. A near miss collapses part of our sap, burying the corporal up to his waist in mud. We claw him free, faces plastered, while shards of shrapnel hiss through the air and clatter against abandoned helmets. Stretcher bearers appear, saints in mud-caked canvas, moving with practiced calm. They load a private whose leg bleeds bright arterial red, wrap a tourniquet, and disappear toward the dressing station, navigating duckboards as if following a memory etched into muscle. I scribble details, the improvised splint of rifle rods, the way morphine softens panic into a half-smile, the whispered apology the wounded man offers for bleeding on a friend's tunic. Shellfire shifts to our support trench, and the sky darkens under a cloud of chalk dust that drifts like malignant snow. We retreat into a dugout reinforced with railway ties, light a single candle, and count impacts by feel, each concussion rippling through rib and spine. Barnes lectures us on shell-burst geometry, explaining that shrapnel follows arcs and angles, just as schoolchildren learn in geometry class, only at a speed that mocks calculation. His dry wit earns a laugh when the ground is trembling like a drumhead, proof that humor, however brittle, remains ammunition of the soul. After 30 minutes, the barrage EBs, we emerge to find the air sharp with plaster dust and the sweet, sick odor of freshly turned soil. A mortar bomb has landed square on the latrine screens, scattering timber and contents alike. After 30 minutes, the barrage ebbs. We emerge to find the air sharp with plaster dust and the sweet, sick odor of freshly turned soil. A mortar bomb has landed square on the latrine screens, scattering timber and contents alike. Private O'Leary surveys the wreckage and declares that perhaps the enemy wished to contribute fertilizer to our cause. Even Barnes snorts at that. The wire we salvaged is finally stacked in neat rolls at the traverse, a monument to pointless effort that nevertheless might close a gap later tonight and save unknown lives. I note it carefully, then close my notebook against the spitting drizzle that returns like an unwelcome encore. Shadows lengthen, and though evening stand too remains hours away. The trench hums, with men repairing what the afternoon destroyed, each act of mending an unspoken boast that the day has failed to crush us. Rats skitter from hiding to inspect fresh craters, their confidence undimmed. In the west, the sun bleeds red through fractured clouds, and I wonder idly if painters will ever capture this color without seeing this place. With that uneasy thought, I turn toward the dugout, intent on scraping mud from my boots before the midnight watch begins, a small concession to order in a landscape that obeys none. Evening drags itself forward like a tired mule, and the sky settles into a bruised violet that promises another hard frost before dawn. A runner from company headquarters stumbles down the traverse, carrying two treasures, the rum jar and the day's mail, and for a minute the trench forgets that artillery exists. The jar is a thick glass cylinder that once contained lime pickle for officers' sandwiches, now filled with navy rum so dark it swallows candlelight. Sergeant Barnes measures each allotment with a battered enamel mug, insisting on fairness, even when mortar fragments still cling to his sleeve. I swallow my share in one swallow and feel it trace a fiery map from tongue to stomach, an internal sunrise that briefly makes the mud look like chocolate pudding. While the jar makes its circuit, the runner produces a sack of letters tied with blue string. Paper is precious, almost sacred, and the men receive each envelope as though it were a relic. One private, named Wilcox, holds his unopened letter against his cheek for a full minute before unfolding it with fingers that tremble more from anticipation than cold. He reads of crops sprouting back in Iowa, of a new calf named Liberty, of a Sunday sermon urging patience, and when he finishes, he passes the sheet to O'Leary, who reads it aloud with a stage actor's diction, so the rest of us can sneeze or laugh without needing our own correspondence. I note the ritual, how shared words from a farm half a world away bind strangers together more tightly than parade ground drills. Barnes reminds everyone that replies must avoid sensitive information, because the censors back in Ruang can be as unforgiving as any enemy sniper. He says this with a wink, then recounts how Private Green once wrote that the stew tasted worse than machine oil and received his letter back with the offending sentence replaced by a blank square of white paper, a tiny battlefield where honesty had been bayoneted by policy. As letters fold away, the lice begin their nightly parade. We call them seam squirrels, those pale insects that thrive in every fold of fabric. Harvey removes his tunic, holds a cigarette close to a seam, and listens for the faint pop as a louse dies under sudden heat. The smell is awful, a mixture of burning hair and binding thread, but the satisfaction is genuine. I record that lice can drink their weight in blood each day, and that soldiers sometimes compare total bites to poker scores, as though misery can be domesticated by turning it into a game. Close to midnight, the temperature dies, and frost etches delicate ferns on every bayonet blade, transforming killing steel into accidental art. I take my place on the fire step beside Wilcox, whose flashlight has died, leaving only the moon to polish the parapet. We lean into the sandbags, rifles balanced on the lip, while star shells bloom overhead at cautious intervals. Each burst reveals no man's land in cruel detail, the craters shining like silver bowls, shattered duckboards protruding like snapped ribs, the wire shadows stretching and shrinking as the magnesium glare drifts earthward. Between flares, the dark presses in, thick and almost warm, smelling of wet hemp and faint tobacco. Halfway through the watch, a low whistle sounds from beyond our wire. Two notes rising, then falling. Not quite birdsong, not quite human either. Wilcox tenses, finger resting on the Springfield trigger, but I murmur that we wait. Silence follows, heavy as damp wool. Then another whistle answers from farther south, a signal I recognize from our own patrols. Moments later, a shape crawls into the nearest shell hole, barely visible, then retreats. Barnes appears at our backs like a wraith, his mustache rimed with frost, and hands me a pocket periscope. Through the small mirror, I see a German soldier, young enough to still have peach fuzz on his jaw, dragging a wounded comrade by the collar of his tunic. No weapon is raised, no attempt at sabotage, only desperate effort under the indifferent moon. Barnes whispers an order, no firing unless threatened, and we watch the tableau with the detached awe of museum visitors observing a living diorama of human instinct. The young German props his friend against a crater wall, fumbles in a pouch, and applies what looks like a crude field dressing, then pats the other's cheek in encouragement before disappearing back toward his own line. Wilcox exhales a breath he did not realize he held. "Kid could not be older than my brother," he murmurs. I nod and note in my book that neither side owns monopoly on mercy, though both pretend otherwise at daylight. An hour later, relieved of duty, I slide down into the dugout, where Harvey has arranged 3 candles around a tin of dubious biscuits. He announces that he is drafting a treatise on the benefits of sleep, yet chooses to stay awake to guard the biscuits from trench rats that have developed the swagger of seasoned pickpockets. I lie on the plank bunk, boots still on, and feel the boards vibrate with distant artillery that never completely rests. My final thought before surrendering to exhaustion is that tomorrow will bring the same gray dawn, the same mud, but also new footnotes for a notebook that grows heavier with each passing hour, a small weight I am oddly grateful to carry. Sleep arrives in restless fragments, brief corridors of oblivion, broken by the drip of the ceiling and the scuttle of ambitious rats. But just after 2 in the morning, Barnes shakes me gently, because the medical officer is conducting one of his surprise foot inspections. A row of men sit on the duckboards, with boots off, socks steaming in the chill, toes pale as candle wax. Lieutenant Pryor kneels before each soldier with the gravity of a parish priest, prodding blisters, muttering about circulation, insisting that everyone rub whale oil into the skin to repel damp. He explains that trench foot is not a simple rash, it is tissue death, born of cold and compression. And if you ignore the warning burn, you may wake to black toes that smell like spoiled cheese. His tone mixes science with menace, an effective combination. Harvey tries a joke about having no whale oil left because rats drink the stuff, and Pryor answers that rats prefer eyes, not ointment, which ends the banter very quickly. When my turn comes, he pauses over a faint red stripe above my ankle and announces that trench fever spreads through lice, bites, and can carry a fever strong enough to make a man hallucinate conversations with his own rifle. He prescribes fresh socks, quinine if available, and a cleansing fire for the seams of my uniform. I dutifully record the exchange, noting that Army medicine relies as much on stern voice as on chemistry. Inspection finished, we trudge to the latrine pits for a second time. This journey illuminated by a pale crescent moon that hangs above the shattered tree line like a chipped plate. A wind from the east moves through no man's land, carrying the faint scent of coal smoke from a German cookhouse, and for a heartbeat the trench smells like a distant railway station rather than a burial ground. The silence invites conversation, so Wilcox asks Barnes how long an average soldier can remain in the line before nerves fray beyond repair. The sergeant answers that official rotation promises 10 days, though calendars here are as elastic as chewing gum in summer heat. And he adds that courage is less about quantity of fear than about finding small excuses to remain. He gestures at my notebook. Writing is one excuse, he says. The lanky corporal claims that counting lice is another, and the group laughs, the sound echoing oddly along the revetment walls. As we return through a communication trench, we pass a pile of loose duckboards waiting for placement. Each board bears a cryptic stamp, U.S. Ordnance, St. Louis, a reminder that somewhere back home, carpenters earn wages for these planks, while newspapers debate whether the war will shorten the baseball season. At 4, the order passes in a tired whisper, "Stand to 4 dawn," and the trench stirs like a lumbering machine, reluctant to engage its gears. Frost glitters on sandbag seams, turning the parapet into a low wall of counterfeit silver, and breath from 100 men rises as one misty plume toward a star that is just beginning to blanch the eastern rim. We climb the fire step, boots crunching crystals that sound like breaking sugar, and settle rifles across the parapet. Noises carry clearly before sunrise, and I hear the muffled click of a German sentry working the bolt of a Mauser somewhere beyond the wire, a small metallic note that rings louder than artillery ever could in moral imagination. Barnes moves down the line, giving quiet encouragement, reminding us that first light is the preferred hour for trench raids, because shadows confuse aim and nerves have not yet been warmed by coffee. He taps my helmet with a gloved knuckle and says that historians often forget the pre-dawn minutes. Yet these are the moments men remember in old age when clocks run slow. Just as the horizon bleeds from pewter to diluted gold, a dark speck flutters above the center crater and circles with frantic energy. It is a carrier pigeon, wings ragged, message tube still attached to its leg. The bird descends in 3 uncertain spirals and lands on the parapet beside Wilcox, who coaxes it gently with crumbs of last night's biscuit. The message paper is damp, but legible enough to reveal a date from 2 weeks earlier and coordinates for an artillery correction long since obsolete. The discovery sparks a brief debate about whether to forward the note or frame it as a talisman, proof that even in mechanized war, a fragile life can still navigate shell bursts and chlorine clouds. Barnes rules that we will feed the bird crumbs and send it home at dusk with an updated report stating only alive, message delayed by circumstances beyond feathered control. The verdict pleases everyone, and for a fleeting instant the trench feels like a sanctuary rather than a cage. But sentiment cannot outpace routine. Within minutes, the relief platoon arrives from the reserve line, faces ruddy and eyes wide with the apprehension that always accompanies a first glimpse of front sector carnage. Our own company will remain another 48 hours despite rumors of rotation, an extension received without surprise. Harvey wagers his remaining pinch of coffee grounds that command will forget us entirely until someone misfiles a casualty list. I tell him that cynicism ages the heart faster than shrapnel, and he replies that hearts have little work here except pumping chill mud through veins. I laugh, though the sound emerges more like a cough, then close my notebook on the last line of day 1. A summary that reads, mud level at boot top, courage level variable, humanity intact, though frequently misplaced, day concluded without personal extinction, which is considered victory under current metrics. I tuck the book into my tunic, tighten my scarf, and step off the firing bench as the first direct ray of sunrise touches a puddle and turns it briefly into molten copper. Dawn has completed its shy climb above the parapet. And with its arrival, day 2 declares itself through the simple mathematics of fatigue. Yesterday +1. The company finishes the stand to ritual, rifles still warm from the breath of tense men, and drifts into the next indispensable ceremony, breakfast. Today the cooks appear with tins of oatmeal, the color of gray paint, flavored by a blessing of condensed milk that arrives in rust-flecked cans marked Chicago. The steam that rises from each mess tin competes with the bitter reek of last night's smoke bombs, and as I eat, I notice that oats cling to the spoon in reluctant globs. Reluctant because the water used to cook them has as much clay as any garden plot. Harvey remarks that if civilization survives this war, some future tycoon will bottle trench water as a patent laxative, claiming results in minutes. His joke earns wide grins because laughter costs no calories, yet the men hoard it as they hoard hardtack crumbs. Midway through the meal, Lieutenant Pryor strides along the duckboards, gas rattle in hand, shaking it with such fury that the metal fins buzz like angry locusts. The cry of gas masks on is answered with a frantic scramble, each man tugging at the canvas sack around his neck as though unwrapping a life-saving gift on Christmas morning. I fit my own mask, lenses fogging with my breath, and through the greenish haze the world turns ghostly, boundaries softened, humanity reduced to silhouettes and muffled coughs. Pryor orders us to stand fast while he releases a training canister of chlorine a dozen paces away, a pale cloud that drifts like shredded gauze across the trench floor. He lectures about density, explaining that chlorine is heavier than air and will crawl into shell holes where wounded men often lie helpless. He describes how the gas irritates the mucous membranes, causing a drowning sensation long before water enters the lungs. And he warns that if the enemy mixes phosgene, the symptoms may arrive late, cunning enough to let a man feel safe for an hour before the convulsions begin. His tone is clinical, but his hands shake slightly, and I note that even seasoned medical officers fear the invisible mathematics of molecules. 10 minutes later, the all-clear rattles, masks come off, and men spit to rid themselves of the rubbery taste, cursing Fritz with imaginative profanity that proves language still evolves under fire. The cloud dissipates into the cold breeze, leaving only memory and a faint smell of bleach. I record every detail, from the way sunlight sliced through the gas to create a sickly rainbow, to the hush that followed when masks lifted, a hush born from the collective realization that the lesson was performed with practice gas, yet tomorrow it may arrive with lethal intent. No sooner has the last whiff of chlorine withdrawn than Sergeant Barnes calls for an ammunition parade, a grand term for men emptying bandoliers onto a tarpaulin so counts can match ledgers. Every cartridge gleams dull brass, tiny promises of noise and recoil, and as the stacks grow, I cannot help seeing them as fragile coins in some infernal economy where debt is paid in fragments of flesh. Barnes counts with the patience of a banker, chiding anyone whose total falls short, then lectures that resupply convoys have been delayed by shell damage to the narrow-gauge rail. Therefore, each bullet represents an hour of labor by teamsters who unload crates under moonlight while German harassing fire skips across the ties. During the inventory, a private named Granger begins to tremble, first in his hands, then shoulders, until the motion spreads through him like wind in a field of wheat. His eyes focus on nothing, and sweat beads along his upper lip despite the chill. Lieutenant Pryor approaches, speaks softly, and guides Granger to a dugout where he sits rocking, whispering that the barrage is still falling, that the roof will collapse. The term shell shock hovers unspoken, yet everyone recognizes the diagnosis: an injury to nerves, as real as shrapnel to bone. Pryor administers a small ampule of morphine, promising temporary silence for the echoes that torment the private, and notes that Granger will be sent to the casualty clearing station tonight if transport can be arranged. Barnes resumes counting, voice steady, though his pencil snaps once under an invisible weight. Shortly after midday, a commotion rises near the ammunition dump behind the reserve trench. I follow the wave of shouting and discover flames licking at a stack of wooden crates, sparks leaping like drunken fireflies. A stray shell fragment, perhaps from a distant harassing gun, has ignited canvas covers soaked in gun oil. Engineers rush with sandbags, but before they close the gap, a crate of very signal cartridges cooks off. The ensuing spectacle is equal parts terror and beauty. Multicolored flares streak skyward in chaotic succession, red, white, and green stars bursting against the daylight. A grotesque imitation of holiday fireworks. Men cheer despite themselves, then duck as a second crate detonates, sending a fountain of live rounds that clatter harmlessly against corrugated roofs. Barnes grumbles that if the enemy observes our accidental aurora, they will shell the location to finish the job. Yet miraculously, no barrage follows. When the last flare sputters out, the engineers douse residual embers, and Barnes posts a sentry with a bucket of sand, as if fire were an unruly child who must stand in the corner. I jot a note that modern war can accidentally create moments of raw splendor. Explosions painting the sky with colors rarely seen outside parish fairs. Proof that beauty and horror often share the same delivery system. Rats emerge to sniff charred crate fragments, undisturbed by spectacle, driven only by the pragmatic question of whether roasted grain residue tastes better than raw. Harvey claims the display will inspire the next War Bonds poster, a scene of triumphant rockets lighting the path to victory, and I remind him that official posters omit the stench of scorched oil, but he says the nose is easier to persuade than the eye. The afternoon drifts on, the dump secured, and in the lull, O'Leary begins carving a chestnut from a broken rifle stock, explaining that strategy is easier to contemplate when the pieces cannot bleed. The hours after the accidental firework display slide into a sluggish afternoon that feels more like a damp blanket than a span of time. Yet work continues because a trench never rests. Engineers inspect the revetments, replacing any sandbag that leaks clay like a punctured organ, while two signalers string fresh telephone wire along the parados, their fingers nimble despite the cold that turns copper bright and brittle. I volunteer to haul ammunition back to the forward dump, a task that grants me a slow tour of neighboring bays, where faces blur into a single expression of disciplined boredom. Along the way, Sergeant Barnes pauses beside a chalk diagram sketched on a plank, and with a piece of charcoal he delivers an impromptu lesson on the creeping barrage, explaining that artillery shells advance in timed lifts of 50 yards, a mathematical curtain meant to protect infantry as they follow at a fixed distance. He taps the diagram with the authority of a schoolmaster, and notes that miscalculations of even 10 seconds can convert the curtain into a scythe that harvests our own ranks. Men nod, absorbing the grim arithmetic, and I record the explanation because textbooks seldom mention how the roar of guns can erase the delicate tick of a pocket watch necessary to keep such precision. Work parties rotate, and by 3 o'clock we have wrestled replacement duckboards into position over the oozing floor. Each plank thudding into place with a sound like a coffin lid settling. The chess knight O'Leary has been carving now wears the faint suggestion of a mane, and he explains that giving a piece identity reminds him that strategy is still possible in chaos. Harvey, meanwhile, organizes a rat hunt, offering half a bar of chocolate for the soldier who snags the largest specimen before evening stand. 2. Trench rats, emboldened by the morning's oatmeal residue, dart along the fire step in quick gray flashes. We arm ourselves with entrenching tool handles and empty ration tins, the game resembling a carnival booth where the prize is nothing more than the illusion of control over vermin. Laughter rises when Private Wilcox swings too vigorously and ends up seated in mud. But he grins anyway because chocolate is rare and his pride is already stained beyond cleaning. As shadows lengthen, Barnes appears again, this time with a reprimand couched in dry wit, reminding us that rats carry diseases more efficiently than any messenger pigeon. Yet he pockets the winning carcass to demonstrate its impressive girth to the cooks who must defend their stores. At tea parade, really just lukewarm water flavored with tired leaves, I sit on an ammunition crate and revisit my notebook, adding sketches of the creeping barrage diagram and tallying the afternoon's rat casualties. 6 confirmed, 3 wounded, and 1 that escaped, carrying a biscuit chunk like a trophy. I note that the competitiveness of grown men can survive any level of discomfort, so long as a reward, no matter how trivial, awaits. The western sky turns a pale gold that quickly fades to lead gray, and smoke from a distant battery drifts overhead, forming shapes that remind Harvey of Arizona mesas, though he has never left Ohio. The observation makes everyone chuckle, because imagination travels farther than any leave pass. Soon, a runner arrives with a short message. Expect gas shelling tonight. Prepare curtains of fire in response. And Barnes orders sentries doubled, and gas alarms positioned at every traverse. The news settles over the trench like fog and conversation dims, but tools keep moving, because fear here is always subordinate to duty. Dusk presses against the parapet, turning the landscape into a flat silhouette, where barbed wire glistens like the spine of a sea creature stranded on barren shore. Stand 2 begins, with the familiar clatter of boots stepping up, bolts sliding home, and the quiet recitation of positions in case darkness demands movement by feel alone. I share the fire step with an engineer corporal who holds a tiny brass lantern painted with stripes of luminous paint. He explains that engineers mark safe paths through debris at night by setting these lanterns low to the ground, each color indicating a hazard. Red for unexploded ordnance, green for sound duckboards, and amber for unstable parapets. The system, he admits, fails whenever enemy fire disrupts the lanterns. Yet the ritual of placing them remains, because soldiers cling to any map, even one that might vanish in a gust of shrapnel wind. During the stand, the silence deepens until only distant guns mutter like old men disputing a card game. Suddenly, from the communication trench behind us, a muted cheer rises, followed by the unmistakable thrum of a petrol engine. We glance back and witness an ungainly contraption rolling forward on steel-flanged wheels set to narrow-gauge track. A squat locomotive no larger than a farm tractor towing to cars, stacked with fresh planks, and a smoking boiler that scents the air with coal. The engineers beam with pride, announcing that headquarters has finally delivered a trench locomotive, a petrol-powered workhorse designed to move supplies under cover of night faster than any mule team. Its arrival feels unreal, an echo from some industrial exposition far removed from mud and wire. Barnes orders us to keep eyes front, yet even he allows a small smile, noting that if the machine survives 48 hours, it will earn more citations than half the regiment. Stand 2 concludes without incident, and the locomotive sputters off toward the reserve trench, its exhaust puffing rhythmic clouds that glow under the first star shells of the evening. We descend from the fire step and gather for the nightly rum ration, smaller tonight because morning's fire destroyed part of the supply, but enough to warm throats and bolster courage. The pigeon rescued at dawn is produced again, now plump with crumbs and resting contentedly in a makeshift coop fashioned from a broken helmet and wire mesh. Harvey writes a short report on a scrap of map margin, mission delayed but spirit intact, and secures it to the bird's leg, declaring that optimism should travel light. At 1900 hours, the coop lid is lifted, and the pigeon wings upward, circling twice before disappearing into the deepening blue. A living telegram carried by instinct and hope. Darkness gathers, and with it the promised gas bombardment begins. Distant pops like corks pulled from enormous bottles. Then the hiss of shells that land somewhere along the line. Gas alarms rattle in quick succession, metal tongues clanging against iron frames, and masks snap on with practiced speed. The cloud passes north of our sector, carried by a wind that shows brief mercy. Yet the tension lingers, a reminder that small shifts of air can decide whether a man breathes chlorine or the promise of tomorrow. Once the all-clear sounds, Barnes assigns night patrol rosters. I draw a second patrol, slated for 1 hour past midnight, which grants me time to write under the protective flicker of a candle shielded by my helmet. I close the notebook after noting that Day 2 introduced a locomotive, elevated the strategic importance of rats, and proved that even poison vapor respects geography when wind consents. Sleep will be shallow, boots on, rifle near, yet I feel a strange gratitude that history continues to unfold line by muddy line, allowing me to turn each page rather than end the book abruptly. At 1 hour past midnight, Barnes nudges me awake with the quiet authority of a man who has witnessed too many patrols to waste words. 4 of us slide over the parapet into no man's land, faces streaked with soot to dull any shine. Rifles slung because weighty iron invites noise, and bayonets fixed more as reassurance than intention. The sky glows faintly under scattered star shells drifting on silk parachutes that whisper as they fall, each flare turning shell craters into pallid bowls, then dying with a sigh that sounds almost disappointed. We advance in short rushes, every step negotiated with fingers first, feeling for tripwires that German patrols sling between pickets to announce clumsy visitors. The ground sucks at our boots, thick mud flavored with cordite, and once my foot breaks a thin crust of frozen water to reveal a pocket of foul gas trapped since the last attack, the odor catching in my throat like spoiled cabbage. Our objective is a listening post halfway to the enemy wire, a shallow pit roofed with duckboards where 2 sentries crouch from dusk until dawn, ears pressed to a stethoscope device that amplifies subterranean digging. German sappers favor midnight for mining, and the post must confirm any fresh scraping that hints at tunnels seeking to undermine our front. We find the sentries awake and twitchy, their candle stub shielded by a biscuit tin punched with pinholes to let light escape in dappled freckles. They report no new vibrations, only the steady heartbeat of distant artillery reverberating through chalk. While Barnes checks their notebook, I scan the horizon. A thin fog rolls across the wire, dew catching on the twisted metal-like strands of glass. And beyond it, a German very light rises, bathing the field in cold magnesium and turning us into shadows on a charcoal canvas. We freeze, breath held tight, until darkness returns. One sentry breaks the hush with an anecdote about the moon, claiming its craters align with those before us, if tilted just so, proof that war scars all spheres. The remark earns a soft chuckle, absurd yet comforting, and I mark it in my memory, another shard of humanity glittering among detritus. On the crawlback, Barnes signals a halt, gesturing to a pale rectangle wedged in mud, a German propaganda leaflet fired by trench mortar earlier in the night. The paper promises generous treatment for prisoners, printed in awkward English with phrases like warm soup and gentle work. Capital letters trying to mimic friendly smiles. Harvey pockets the leaflet, declaring it will make fine kindling, then adds that any soup gentler than our breakfast porridge deserves inspection. We reach the parapet unnoticed, muscles quivering from tension, and drop into the trench, where the faint warmth of braziers feels like midsummer. I log the patrol, noting ground conditions, absence of digging, and the peculiar philosophy regarding lunar geography. The patrol disperses to bunks, but sleep proves reluctant. Gas alarms rattle twice more, though clouds drift harmlessly north, each false warning peeling away another layer of nerve. In the dugout, Wilcox unwraps a harmonica padded in oiled cloth and begins a fragile rendition of Old Folks at Home, his breath weaving through dents in the metal reeds. One by one, voices join, hesitant at first, then firm, a trench choir stitching shards of melody into a blanket warm enough to shelter an hour. Barnes allows the music, even humming a bass line, explaining later that communal song dampens shell shock more effectively than bromide tablets. A statement I resolve to verify in future medical journals if they ever account for harmonicas. Dawn threatens at the rim of the sky, a faint silver coin rising behind shredded clouds, when from somewhere down the line a single rifle cracks. Sound travels quick in cool air, ricocheting off corrugated iron, and every man stiffens as if yanked by a common string. Silence follows, uneasy, thick with questions. After 5 breaths, a runner appears, face pale against the gloom, and reports that a sniper round found Lieutenant Pryor while he checked drainage near the latrine screens. The bullet entering beneath the helmet brim, death instant and oddly merciful given the catalog of possible wounds. Shock rolls through the trench like slow thunder. Barnes removes his helmet, a gesture older than the war, and we do the same, heads bowed, though prayers remain silent. Someone mutters that a medical officer denied to rats and lice is a tactical loss greater than any gun, a sentiment met with grim nods. Work resumes, because war respects no funeral. 2 stretcher bearers carry Pryor to the aid post, his body wrapped in a ground sheet, neatly folded, tags tied, pockets sealed. I assist in clearing his dugout, separating medical texts from personal letters, and find among them a small notebook labeled Studies in Trench Pathology. I skim a page where he theorized that constant damp weakens the immune system by forcing blood away from extremities, increasing susceptibility to fever. The handwriting stops mid-sentence, a thought severed by lead. I add the notebook to my satchel, promising to finish the page when quiet allows. Outside, engineers realign the latrine screens, as if denying the sniper the same line of sight twice, and the smell of chloride of lime mixes with brewing coffee in a scent that might define the war more accurately than cordite. At stand 2, we mount the fire step, while the eastern sky blushes pink, too delicate a color for this stage. And yet there it is, innocent as spring blossom. No artillery greets the day, only the creak of boots and the whisper of a new officer, Lieutenant Hughes, introducing himself with careful courtesy. He quotes from memory a line by Tennyson about courage leaning on faith, and Harvey replies that here faith prefers to lean on decent socks, earning the first subdued laugh since the shot. I record everything, from Hughes smoothing his sleeve over a fresh second lieutenant stripe to the moment the harmonica falls silent as Wilcox pockets it in respect. Day 2 closes not with the roar of a barrage, but with the slender crack of a single bullet and the echo of a song unfinished. Proof that war measures loss not merely by numbers, but by the small gaps left in routine when a voice is removed. I close my notebook on that thought, the page heavy with damp, and wait for dawn's full light to declare that day 3 has begun without asking whether we are ready. Dawn lifts itself over the broken horizon like a weary clerk opening shop. Mist clings to craters, turning wire into trembling silver threads. Frost crunches under my heel as I mount the fire step. The platoon stands mute, heads angled toward the spot where Pryor fell. A faint scent of cold coffee drifts with the sharper bite of chloride, a sour perfume that declares day 3 officially open. Lieutenant Hughes orders a brief service. 2 stretcher bearers lay Pryor's sheet-wrapped body on an ammo crate, borrowed for the moment. Barnes reads a psalm about walking through shadowed valleys, his voice steady yet edged with gravel. When the final amen fades, we raise helmets in salute. A pigeon flutters overhead, its wings creaking like old hinges, then vanishes into the pale sky. Breakfast follows, because the war timetable ignores grief. Oatmeal again, the color of drowned ashes, served with condensed milk whose thick sweetness feels almost improper. Harvey sprinkles his with rifle cleaning powder, claiming it adds crunch. I scrawl the recipe in my notebook, certain no cookbook will ever print it. Wilcox suggests marketing the dish as frontline flapjacks once peace arrives. Water detail brings tin buckets from a rear sump. The liquid smells faintly of creosote and dead leaves, filtered through layers of canvas meant to catch larger sins. Hughes reminds us to boil every drop to dodge dysentery, a lesson learned from the last rotation when half a platoon spent 3 days running between bunk and latrine. Nobody jokes. Intestines rank higher than rifles in trench priorities. While buckets steam on crude braziers, Pryor's medical texts pass from hand to hand. One chapter warns that lice can transmit trench fever within 12 hours of a bite. Barnes reads the passage aloud, then leads a mass delousing with candle flames, tiny pops echoing like festive crackers. Flames scorch more fabric than insects, yet morale rises with each sizzling snap. Mid-morning inspection targets drainage. Engineers prod the sump with iron rods, cursing each blockage. They explain that every inch of water adds 30 pounds of pressure to revetment walls, enough to send entire bays sliding into ooze. I copy the figures, marveling that physics textbooks seldom mention the smell that accompanies hydraulic failure. We haul replacement duckboards along a communication trench newly christened Missouri Road by homesick lads from St. Louis. The boards slap down in rhythmic sequence, a wooden heartbeat pacing our advance. Mud sucks at our boots, reluctant to surrender its latest prizes. When we pause to breathe, distant guns rumble, reminding us that effort earns only temporary stillness. A surprise visitor ends the shift. A small hedgehog, bristling and fearless, waddles from a drainpipe and noses a discarded biscuit. The men gather, enchanted by this absurd ambassador of calm. Harvey christens him Corporal Needles and offers a promotion if he eats a rat. Laughter ripples down the trench, light and brief, but precious as a dry match on a wet night. By midday, the mist lifts just enough to reveal each crater in sullen detail. Stew arrives in petrol tins, thicker today, dotted with beans and a brave slice of carrot. We queue along Missouri Road, helmets held like hungry beaks. Lieutenant Hughes ladles 2 scoops per man, then uses a bayonet as ruler to flatten any cheeky mound. Steam fogs faces, beads on rifle barrels, a fragile veil over iron routine. Harvey carries his portion to the firing step and reads fortunes in the grease, predicting clear skies. Fate replies at once. A German whiz-bang screams overhead, bursts beyond the support trench, and a spume of earth patters back like filthy rain. Men duck, yet keep grip on spoons. When shards stop falling, they rise. Lunch undefeated, mud seasoning accepted without comment. Barnes taps the smoke column and lectures on light field guns, explaining that high velocity means sound trails danger. He lists shell casings and fuse lengths the way others quote batting averages. I scribble fast, aware that this classroom marks errors in bone. He adds that French crews call such rounds chirping crickets, a name too gentle for metal that unthreads lives. Silence returns in hesitant steps. Oatmeal grit crunches between teeth, but appetite wins. Corporal Needles, the hedgehog, waddles from a drain, nose twitching at beans. Harvey awards him 1 bean and a carrot fragment, promoting our mascot to sergeant by unanimous vote. Needles bristles proudly, as if rank carries extra worms. Laughter flares, bright as a match in drizzle. A ration cart rattles forward, drawn by 2 narrow-gauge ponies with ribs like xylophones. Canvas sacks of brown bread thump onto duckboards, followed by a single jar of plum jam that gleams like sunset glass. Hughes decrees the first taste for signalers who have endured 48 hours of static. Jam is dispensed by strict tablespoon, sticky coins paid into morale. Letters arrive bundled in oilcloth. O'Leary unfolds a photo of his sister wearing a suffrage sash, pride shining through grime. Debate sparks on whether ballots will reach women before peace visits Europe. Wilcox wagers to cigarettes in favor, but no one risks the opposite stake. Barnes muses that democracy advances on quieter fronts, yet still meets artillery of opinion. The afternoon grows restless. A dud shell lands nose first beside the pigeon coop, standing like a sinister sundial. Engineers cocoon it in sandbags, lug it to a flooded crater, and submerge the menace. We watch until ripples settle. A lonely frog croaks disapproval, possibly the last civilian witness to trench procedures. Sunset bleeds through ragged cloud, staining puddles copper, stand to summons us once more, silhouettes framed against bruised sky. Hughes conducts the rifle check, voice steady, boots firm. Darkness thickens, bringing the smell of cordite, damp wool, and the faint hope that tomorrow might forget to arrive. I close my notebook, ink smeared yet readable, and brace for another night among rats and distant guns. Night thickens until the trench seems carved from ink, yet chore lists remain. Hughes sends a wiring team beyond the parapet, their boots padded with sacking to mute squelch. I stand watch while they adjust picket angles, sliding fresh strands through frost-covered loops. Star shells bloom above, white flowers that drift down slow, sketching every crater in sudden light, then leave heavier dark once the sparks sigh out. Return route passes the sunken latrine pit where chloride fumes wrestle with raw decay. A lone gas shell lands beyond the reserve traverse, its crack followed by a wet pop. Green fog rolls low across cabbage weeds, settling only when the cold air pins it in hollows. Masks snap on, voices turn to muffled frogs, discipline catching panic before it grows teeth. 10 minutes later, the all-clear rattles. Hughes orders salvage of the casing. Engineers twist out the fuse, pocket shards for study, then drag the gleaming brass into a sack bound for rear craftsmen who hammer souvenirs that officers trade for cigars. Barnes notes that the front converts danger into trinkets, proof that memory will demand metal when imagination finally tires. Close to 2 hours before midnight, I join the listening post again. A tin stethoscope plate rests against bare earth, magnifying secret stirrings below. Through the headphones, I catch taps, even 3 seconds apart, perhaps German miners shaping a chamber. Barnes records the rhythm, sketches an azimuth, and murmurs that tomorrow artillery will argue with that coordinate. Back in the main trench, Hughes presents a talk on helmets. He shows a battered French Adrian, a British Brodie, and our newer American Bull, explaining how curved steel deflects shrapnel that falls like iron sleet. To steep a brim, he adds, channels rain down the spine, an engineer's cruel joke. The class listens, grateful for science that touches skin. Mail call repeats under candle glow. Wilcox receives a glossy pamphlet titled Modern Farming with Tractors, photos of bright machines plowing peaceful acres. He passes it round, and men marvel at soil without shell scars. Harvey folds the picture of a padded seat, tucks it behind his paybook, and vows that if he survives, his first purchase will never smell like cordite. A visitor arrives near to a lank black cat with one torn ear trots along duckboards, pausing at each rat hole with professional interest, then curls beside the brazier in an elegant question mark. Sergeant needles the hedgehog, backs away, dignity intact. Barnes declares the cat enlisted on site, rank private, first class, specialty vermin control, rations to include milk if any can be scrounged. Stand Down reaches us at 4. Frost feathers, the corrugated roof, glowing under match flame. I sit with notebook, trapping words before ink stiffens. I write of star shell blossoms, of brass trophies, of miners beneath, and of the cat who chose our sector. Artillery mutters like distant thunder, but the trench feels a shade less lonely. For now we share the night with Whiskers as well as Quills. Private Whiskers earns fame before sunrise. A squeal pierces the gloom, then the cat trots the duckboards with a rat swinging from his jaws like a grisly medal. Men cheer in whispers, wagering which mascot, hedgehog or cat, will lead the daily tally. Barnes records in the log that enemy morale among rodents is collapsing. I note the scene, proof that predators thrive in this grand laboratory of decay. Stand to greets a thin white stripe of dawn. Eyes sting from smoke, shoulders ache under frozen patties, yet rifles still rise above the parapet in measured rhythm. Far off, a German trumpet attempts a fragment of reveille, the notes wandering over wire like a lost bird. No answering shot follows, only an uneasy hush, as if both armies agree that music and murder should never share the same measure at sunrise. Engineers huddle around a chalk map spread on sandbags. Color pins mark the taps heard in night soil, predicting a hostile gallery beneath Crater 7. Their plan is a camouflage charge set for tomorrow noon. They explain tamping and pressure cones to my notebook, grim vocabulary that turns soil to lethal vapor. Barnes listens, jaw tight, while I sketch the ugly geometry of subterranean lungs. Breakfast parade surprises us with tins of canned peaches from forgotten stock. Syrup as thick as glue glitters on mess tin rims and lures blue bottle flies despite the chill. Harvey names each peach half after a Midwestern state, then devours Missouri and Kansas with theatrical relish. Lieutenant Hughes allows a brief smile, though he keeps Officer Poise by wiping syrup with a pocket square no cleaner than the trench wall. Mid-morning lesson covers trench periscopes built from biscuit tins and mirror shards. Hughes lectures on obedient light, angles of incidence, and how glass can spare a scalp. We raise our crude devices in turn, mapping distant parapets onto slates. Wilcox claims he spots a Prussian helmet plume and draws it proudly. Whether real or imagined, the exercise nails the point that seeing first is living longer. Near 11A YMCA, wagon rattles down Missouri Road, red triangle fading on canvas, but hope bright within. Volunteers unload battered books, smelling of cellar mold and peacetime classrooms. Titles vary from Shakespeare to seed catalogs. Men jostle like scholars in a ruined cloister. I choose a slim astronomy guide, planning to chart constellations unscarred by star shells if the sky ever clears. Afternoon thumps alive with our 75s. Shells streak overhead in disciplined salvos, wind whipping hair as if giants sigh. Black fountains blossom behind the German line. Reply comes in lazy coal box shells that growl, then burst into oily smoke. One fragment shears a plank from the pigeon loft, yet the birds remain, perhaps trusting in wooden walls and soldier curses to hold the sky. Rain sweeps in, first pinpricks, then steady curtain. Water slinks through seams and rises above duckboards, turning the trench into reluctant canal. Hand pumps gasp, rum barrels float, and ration sacks gain new stains. Barnes mutters that artillery breaks bodies, while rain breaks resolve. Private Whiskers claims the rum barrel top as ark and surveys his damp kingdom, tail flicking disdain at the storm. Evening stand, 2 closes the weary loop. Fog thickens, masking wire and crater alike in blank theater, scrim. Hughes posts double sentries where water undercut the wall. In the dugout, I dry notebook pages near candle flame, tasting salt damp on my tongue. The astronomy book opens at Orion, printed stars, tidy and eternal. Real stars hide behind cloud, yet I trace the pattern, pretending heaven still watches. Night settles like damp wool over everything, the rain easing into a thin drizzle that still finds its way down collars. Pumps wheeze in tired rhythm, pushing brown water back toward the sump, though the level never truly drops. The plank floor floats under each step, a wobble that mocks balance and patience alike. Barnes posts 2 men to keep buckets moving. Pay saved by muscle and resolve. Past midnight, the engineers return with stores of ammonal packed in canvas tubes, their faces masked with mud to dull any gleam. They whisper coordinates, mark the crater edge with stub candles shielded by tin, then sink the charge in silence. The fuse will wait for noon when wind should favor us. I watch shapes fade into dark, feeling Earth hold a breath it cannot know it has. Inside the dugout, the brazier glows low, burning sandbag scraps soaked in whale oil. Rum ration trickles in half mugs, the jar nearly empty, yet spirits rise once the first sip warms throats. Harvey proposes a toast to boots that still have soles, and to Private Whiskers, whose patrol of the duckboards continues unbroken. The cat answers with a blink that may be agreement or disdain. Talk turns to trench art. Wilcox reveals a ring he has carved from a shell fuse, edges filed smooth with knife-stone patience. He plans to send it home inside a tobacco tin once sensors allow parcels again. Hughes praises the craft, then reminds us that souvenirs cost fingers if timing fails. The ring passes hand to hand, cold metal gathering stories it will never fully tell. A single-star shell rises beyond the German line, lighting the wire in bone-white glare. 4 heartbeats, every shadow sharpens, every helmet rim gleams like silver. Then darkness returns thicker than before. Barnes murmurs that the flare was likely a range check for morning guns, and orders sentries to double the count of minutes between each flick of cigarette ash. Rain gives way to sleet near 3. Ice pebbles rattle on tin roofs, clinging to greatcoats in shining scales that melt as quickly as they form. Sergeant Needles emerges from hay bedding, sniffs the air, then retreats, judgment delivered on the night weather. The brazier hisses when sleet drips from the ceiling, sending out a brief scent of scorched rope and oil. Just before first light, a short mortar barrage stutters onto the support trench. The shells are small, but land close enough to shake mud from rafters. We brace under the wooden beams, counting blasts like beads on a rosary. 12 thumps, then quiet. Hughes dispatches a runner to assess damage. The man returns, soaked but calm. 1 crate of bread lost, no blood spilled. Stand 2 arrives again, the cycle grinding forward. Frost laces the parapet, tracing delicate filigree on sandbag seams, beauty ignorant of occupancy. Coffee brews in helmets set over glowing coals, acrid steam mixing with the smell of cordite and wet wool. Morning dares a pale beam through ragged cloud, silvering puddles and drawing steam from parapet frost. Engineers review their buried tubes, tapping each fuse head like surgeons checking a pulse. Hughes walks the line, reminding us that underground thunder will answer taps heard last night. He calls it preventive medicine, soil version, but his smile sits heavy, aware that every cure carries its own fever. At noon, a whistle shrieks. Then the camouflet roars below crater 7. Ground heaves like a kicked carpet. Mud geysers climb higher than the stunted trees, and a bass note rolls along the trench wall, flattening candles and courage alike. Dust snowdrifts for minutes, coating helmets with gray flour. When silence falls, it feels thin, fabric worn by too many washings, ready to tear at any shout. Retaliation arrives in a brace of mine warfares. Fat bombs arc lazily, then crash beside the former crater rim, spewing soot and broken wire. One fragment finds Private Grady carving a clean gutter across his thigh. Medics bind the wound with field dressing marked April 1915, proof that supply chains savor nostalgia. Morphine buys calm while stretcher teams splash toward the aid post. Barnes orders fresh sandbags stacked 3 rows high where blast scooped new mouths in the trench face. We pass bags hand to hand, rhythm steady as a hymn. Each sack leaks thin trickles of chalk dust that paint white cuffs on gloves. Sun breaks free mid-afternoon, a brief yellow coin in pewter sky. Men drape socks on bayonet points, hoping warmth will cheat mildew. Sergeant Needles explores the drying line, nudging wool toes as if judging stitchwork. Private Whiskers hunts in shadows cast by sock flags, tail twitching with royal entitlement. The mascots ignore each other, kingdom split by species treaty. A chaplain appears, towing a battered phonograph wrapped in oilcloth. He cranks the handle until the spring sighs, then sets a record that crackles out Sousa marches, warped by trench damp. Some men whistle along, others close eyes, letting memory march them down streets that never knew shell holes. I note that even thin music can buttress walls of willpower better than sandbags. Rain returns before tea, polite at first, then insistent. Buckets line up under drip edges, filling with brown broth destined for pumps. Despite mud, dinner arrives, tinned beef fried atop spent shell base plates. The aroma fights the wet air, wins briefly, then yields to cordite that wafts from a distant barrage shaping night agenda. Stand to completes the weary circle. Fog thickens, muffling boot clicks and dulling star shell glare. Hughes posts double sentries near the fresh bag wall, rifles ready for patrol whispers. I sit at dugout table lit by stub candle, ink scratching into damp notebook. Today traded soil for shock, traded socks for sun, yet left most hearts still beating. Ledger closed. Tomorrow credits remain unknown. Night rolls forward, and the trench settles into that eerie equilibrium where every drip, creak, and distant shell seems amplified by the dark. Barnes selects 4 men for a silent patrol to check the wire gap left by the recent camouflet. I volunteer, craving movement over the mud stench inside the dugout. We slip over the fire step, boots wrapped in sacking, rifles slung bayonets left behind to lessen noise. Star shells drift above us like dying paper lanterns, each burst revealing a jagged landscape of water-filled craters and snared wire before plunging everything back into black. Halfway to the gap, we pause beside a corpse long sunk into the soil, identity erased by weeks of weathering. Hughes nods toward it and quietly remarks that the war hoards its own harvest, a statement so calm it steals the chill from the air more effectively than the rum. At the wire, we replace damaged spirals, twisting metal until palms blister, then retrace our route, guided by the faint glow of the trench braziers. Safe again only when the parapet hides us from enemy flares. Inside the dugout, a lantern swings from a nail, sending shadows that swim across the plank walls like fish in a murky pond. Harvey boils tea in a mess, tin blackened by months of use. The drink, a harsh blend of leaves and mud grit. He hands cups around, and we sip, while Private Whiskers circles our feet, fur slightly singed from a brazier mishap earlier. Barnes updates the trench log, noting the repair and the absence of German patrols. Then reads aloud a weather forecast, pinned from headquarters, claiming clearer skies by dawn. The prediction wins polite laughter, since the ceiling drips steadily on his cap. Wilcox asks if the stars care about forecasts, and thumbs the astronomy guide, pointing out Sirius on a damp page. I step outside for a minute, look upward, and see patches of silver between racing clouds, as if the heavens are indeed considering a change of heart. My notebook receives that thought, because even rumors of starlight feel like news worth archiving on this front. The dugout lantern gutters, then steadies, and the card game in the corner resumes with muted curses as Wilcox loses yet another hand to Barnes, who claims luck is merely discipline in disguise. Outside, the rain has stopped at last, leaving a hush so deep that we hear individual droplets sliding from sandbag seams into puddles below. I venture up the sap to verify the calm notebook ready, and step onto the fire step just as a ragged hole opens in the clouds. Starlight pours through, pale and trembling, illuminating the waste between the lines with a ghostly glow that feels almost holy after so many nights under smoke and sleet. Hughes joins me, breath visible in the cold air, and points out constellations he learned as a boy on the Iowa plains. He traces the belt of Orion with a gloved finger, then follows the line to Sirius, explaining that sailors once steered by these lights long before compasses became standard gear. I jot his lesson while studying the vast silence over our heads. The void seems to mock the squabble of trenches below, as though the universe barely registers our efforts. A single very light arcs up from the German side, bright as a magnesium sun, and for a few seconds the battlefield is captured in stark relief, every wire strand throwing a hard shadow, every crater edge shining like a silver coin. When the flare dies, the stars appear brighter still, and Hughes murmurs that even astronomers would envy such clarity were they not obliged to stand knee-deep in mud to see it. We discuss parallax and the speed of light, lofty notions that briefly lift us above the immediate misery. Then a heavy shell booms far to the south, reminding us that lofty thoughts must share space with low realities. We descend to the trench, boots squelching, and Hughes orders the sentries to log the precise time of the enemy flare for artillery reference. As I replace the notebook in my tunic, I notice Private Whiskers perched on a boxed Lewis gun, eyes wide, pupils reflecting both star and candle. In that feline gaze, I sense the impartial watchfulness of nature itself, noting but never judging, recording but never choosing sides. The moment feels worth saving, so I add a final line to the page before the candle stubs out. Just before stand down, a runner stumbles in from the reserve trench with news that the narrow gauge rail has slipped off its embankment under the weight of last night's ammunition carts. The message bears the urgent stamp of quartermaster anxiety, for without that rail the front may go hungry for shells and tobacco in equal measure. Barnes dispatches a repair party at once, choosing men whose boots still possess some soul. I join them, eager for novelty, and we slog through ankle-deep sludge until we reach the tilted rails, gleaming under dawn's first blush. An engineer sergeant explains the physics of load distribution, drawing in the mud with a chalky stick, and shows how the sleepers twisted when the clay beneath liquefied. We wedge scavenged planks under the sagging iron lever with pick handles, and chant in time to keep strain consistent. A distant battery thumps, shaking the ground, and a few sleepers settle obediently into their new beds. By the time our breath steams like locomotive exhaust, the track lies level enough for cautious rolling. The sergeant signals, and a single flat car nudges forward, creaking yet confident. Cheers rise, echoing along the cutting, and for one bright instant it feels as though we have reclaimed a fragment of control from this unruly landscape. On the return march, we find the YMCA wagon again, now dispensing tins of sweetened cocoa. Hughes insists every man drink his ration hot, arguing that morale rests on small mercies brewed in large pots. As the cocoa thickens inside my mess tin, its aroma mingles with cold morning air, forming a memory so vivid I suspect it will linger long after cordite fades. While we sip, a carrier dog from the signals unit trots by with a canvas tube strapped to its collar, tail wagging as if the whole front were a pleasant stroll. The animal pauses to inspect Sergeant Needles, who bristles but holds position like a prickly sentinel. Private Whiskers observes from a crate, rendering quiet judgment on this canine courier. The exchange ends without violence, a rare diplomatic success across species lines. Back in the trench, Hughes calls the roster, praises the rail crew, then reminds us that relief is due in 48 hours, a promise as fragile as frosted cobwebs, but still worth hearing. I retreat to the dugout, stretch aching legs, and pen the closing entry for day 3, noting that celestial lectures, rail physics, and cocoa diplomacy have all found space in a single cycle of mud and fear. Ledger balanced, I cap the pen, shove the notebook under my kit, and allow my eyes to close as the rats resume their quiet congress overhead. The cocoa settles into stomachs like warm courage, and morning chores resume with a rare hint of energy. Barnes assigns me to inventory the pigeon loft after last night's shell shave. I climb the rungs, sunlight slanting across the sodden boards, and count 12 birds blinking at me with calm indifference. One has lost a few tail feathers, likely from shock, but all remain flight capable. While I record wing markings in my notebook, I notice a small tin cylinder wedged behind a feed sack. Unscrewing the cap reveals a message in elegant French, dated 2 weeks earlier, requesting artillery support for an assault that clearly never materialized. The loft must have housed a borrowed French bird that wandered west instead of east. Hughes decides we will forward the note anyway, scrawling in the margin that its tardy arrival proves even avian mail respects trench delays. Early afternoon finds the trench vibrating under a distant bombardment aimed at a sector south of us, each concussion rolling through ribs like mallet strikes on a drum. Engineers take the lull to demonstrate improvised grenade racks fashioned from wire hoops nailed to the parados, a design copied from Canadian units reputed for tidy storage. They show how the wooden mill's handles fit snug, ready for instant use, yet secure from accidental tumble. Harvey tests one by jogging past with exaggerated sway, proving the bombs stay put, then bows as if on stage. Barnes applauds the practicality, reminding us that reliable organization often saves more lives than reckless heroics. I jot the lesson beside a sketch of the rack, noting dimensions in case some later historian wonders how order survived amid mud chaos and relentless noise. A sudden courier arrives near sunset bearing a parcel wrapped in oilcloth, the first Red Cross comfort kit our platoon has seen in months. Inside are knitted gloves, peppermint lozenges, and a slim booklet of devotional poems. The gloves vanish in seconds, claimed by men whose fingers have known only damp wool, while the lozenges dissolve on tongues unused to pure sweetness. Hughes reads one poem aloud, its lines describing summer meadows and the lazy hum of bees, imagery so distant that for a moment we fall silent, each soldier chasing a private memory of grass beneath bare feet. When the reading ends, Harvey clears his throat, says the poet forgot to include shell bursts and latrine stink, yet he wipes his eyes with a sleeve anyway, and no one mocks him for it. Night patrol duty circles back to me and Wilcox. Moonlight slips between shredded clouds, spilling silver across no man's land, turning puddles into mirrors that warp with every breeze. We crawl to the repaired wire gap, pausing when a flare lifts from the German side. In the bright glare, we spot a ragged scarecrow figure hanging on the wire. Once a soldier, now a grim waypoint for those who risk the crossing. Wilcox whispers that the dead still stand guard, perhaps unwilling to abandon posts their governments have forgotten. We plant 2 new screw pickets, twist wire in tight spirals, and retreat without drawing fire. Back in the trench Hughes logs the patrol, then orders hot tea for the pair of us, a luxury boiled in a dented bucket over a brazier that pops and hisses like distant musket volleys. Wilcox and I nurse the steaming tea while Private Whiskers prowls the dugout edge, each paw placed with exaggerated care as if he owned stock in silence. Barnes studies the latest situation map spread across a ration crate, tracing the red pencil line that marks our forward lip. He explains that intelligence suspects a German listening raid before dawn, a stealth visit meant to confirm the depth of last night's repairs. His calm description feels like a weather report. Only the forecast calls for steel rather than rain. I add his words to my notebook, noting the strange normality with which men discuss strangers, intent on dragging them into darkness. Outside, drizzle resumes, light enough to hiss on sandbags without drumming, the trench settling into its usual breathing rhythm that mixes mud stink with cordite haze. A gas alarm rattles just before 2, the clapper banging the triangle with frantic urgency. Masks snap over faces, buckles tightened by blind fingers that need no sight for this well-practiced ballet. Greenish shells burst in the lines beyond, low pops followed by the whisper of chlorine hugging the ground. We crouch on fire steps, rifles ready, though visibility drops to the width of a bayonet. Hughes crawls past, tapping each shoulder, reminding us to breathe slow, conserve filter life, and trust the cloth. His voice carries authority, dampened by rubber and thick air, yet it soothes. After 15 minutes, wind shifts west, peeling the cloud away like damp bedding, and the all-clear clangs. We peel masks, lungs grateful, yet tinged by the pepper bite that lingers at the back of the throat, a taste memory that refuses to fade even after a slug of tepid water from dented canteens. No sooner has calm returned than an odd whistle pierces the night to rising notes that do not match any bugle call. We freeze, then spot movement near the damaged parapet. A lean stray dog trots toward us, carrying a sock in its teeth, tail wagging with bold cheer. It skirts the puddles as if born to trenches and stops at the brazier where Sergeant Needles sleeps in a coil. Whiskers arches, fur bristling, but the dog sets the sock gently beside the hedgehog, then sits, ears perked, awaiting verdict. Barnes laughs, a rare full sound, and declares the animal captain's socks on account of the gift delivered. Hughes agrees and assigns the dog to courier duty, promising rations and a collar fashioned from spare webbing. I record that not all midnight visitors arrive armed. Approach of dawn demands fresh stand. We climb the fire, step one more time, shoulders stiff, boots soaked yet serviceable. In the gray half-light, I study the German parapet through a biscuit tin periscope, its edges crusted by salt from countless damp mornings. A lone figure there adjusts a firing step sandbag, his posture mirroring my own routine across the churned waste. Separation feels only as wide as the desolate field, yet as deep as the convictions that placed us here. Barnes instructs me to mark the position of a new wooden screen set across their wire, possible sign of sap work. I sketch quickly, then tuck the pencil away as the sky bruises purple and red behind ruined trees that stand like the ribs of some giant skeleton bleaching in acid air. At first, clear light, our artillery tests a short barrage for guns timed in ripple to check alignment. The shells sail overhead with the rusted train wheel hum that defines distance yet offers no comfort. Each crater leaps upward in muddy fountains that settle into silence more oppressive than noise. German counterguns remain still, perhaps nursing ammunition or simply waiting. Hughes shares the rumor that supplies are low on both fronts after rail disruptions, meaning today may pass without a major show. Harvey mutters that he will believe quiet only after darkness falls without loss, a philosophy shaped by too many false dawns. The comment draws nods, even from Barnes, who normally scolds pessimism as wasted energy. We end day 3 with a meal of hardtack soaked in broth, spooned from helmets, and seasoned by smoke. The mascots curl together near the brazier, treaty ratified by shared fatigue. Engineers finish shoring the camouflage crater with logs scavenged from a collapsed barn. Each timber stamped with a date far older than the war, would once meant to cradle hay, now pressed into defense of men. I close my notebook after 8 full pages, thumb aching from cramped writing, and note that this single rotation has recorded the arrival of frost, gas, poetry, cocoa, and unexpected diplomacy delivered by sock and paw. Relief remains one sunrise away, and though eyelids sag, minds stay sharp enough to dream of a rear billet where floors stay dry and stars shine only for wonder, not warning. Relief rumors taste sweet, yet night proves the front never grants clean exits. Near 2200, a stretcher call echoes along Missouri Road. A listening post south of Crater 7 has taken shrapnel from a wandering coal box shell. Barnes leads the rescue team, lantern shuttered, boots careful. I follow to observe notebook, tucked in blouse for later. We find 2 men, one conscious and cursing in a Louisiana drawl, the other silent, breath shallow. Hughes supervises the bandage of a chest wound, wrapping with field dressing until white fabric blooms crimson like dark poppies. Rain begins again, light but steady, turning every word into mist. The stretcher poles sink as we lift, shoulders straining. Each pace up the sap feels like dragging the night itself toward the aid post, yet no one slips, and the Shell-Hole River remains mercifully quiet. The aid post squats under a tarred tarpaulin, supported by timber struts that still smell of forest when rain warms the sap. Inside, a Canadian surgeon named Fraser trims gauze by candle stub, face calm as a banker closing ledgers. He thanks Barnes, checks pulses, then pulls morphine from a tin once meant for biscuits. While needles slide beneath skin, he describes the odds. 40% save rate when chest wounds miss the great vessels, lower when lung tissue sings with each inhalation. We nod, store the grim arithmetic, and back away to give the doctor room. Outside, Captain Socks shakes sleet from his coat, then trots after an orderly, carrying a basin, ever curious. Whiskers guards the entrance, tail flicking approval, as if he alone grants passage to life-saving hands and tools. Returning along the duckboards, we pass the pigeon loft, lantern glow, catching fresh frost on roof tar. One bird flutters against wire mesh, unsettled by stretcher echoes. Harvey calms it with a whisper about cornfields and barns, a fantasy of peaceful roosts beyond artillery maps. I jot the odd lullaby, noting that men share comfort with wing and whisker alike. When nightmares crowd the dark, at the fire step, Hughes has the platoon rehearse silent signals for tomorrow's handover. Clenched fist for hold, palm sweep for forward, 2 taps on helmet for gas. The drill runs smooth despite tired limbs. Barnes compliments discipline, then hands out a rare extra biscuit, chalking the expense against the budget line called human spirit. Crunching stale flour under starlight, we agree the account merits overdraft. Close to zero, to fog thins and moonlight sprawls across no man's land, turning wire into shining calligraphy of war. I settle beside the parapet and lift my improvised periscope. In the mirror, German trenches sit quiet, flares absent, perhaps nursing their own wounded silence. A faint melody drifts from their direction, a harmonica, or maybe a mouth organ, notes wavering yet defiantly human. Wilcox listens, then answers with a soft line from Home Sweet Home. The tune carries, hangs a moment, then fades, leaving only night sounds and the omnipresent drip of trench walls. I write that music, even traded across killing fields, finds its echo. Hughes' orders rest in rotation. We slip into dugout shadow, mascots curled at brazier, and I close day 3 by recording that under mud, steel, and bone-grinding labor, the heart still seeks harmony, however brief. Dawn sidles in with a bruised violet glow that sinks slowly into crater pools, and the trench wakes, as if an enormous crank turns invisible gears. Barnes taps helmets, rouses sentries, and the stand to ritual begins, for what we hope is the final time in this sector. Frost feathers the parapet, brittle lace that shatters under every rifle, but Hughes circulates with a tin mug of ersatz coffee, urging slow sips to spare throats already raw from gas drills and damp air. I note that even substitutes brewed from roasted barley gain the dignity of coffee when served before sunrise. Captain Socks trots past, carrying a discarded mitten like a lantern, while Whiskers stalks a phantom shape near the wire, tail swaying in calculated arcs. The mascots seem to sense the coming change in rhythm, their instincts perhaps tuned more keenly than any signal office. Relief arrives at first true light, a column of fresh faces stepping through the communication trench with cautious eyes and packs still square on shoulders. Their boots shine with depot grease, proof of recent parade grounds untouched by front-line mire. We exchange brief greetings, names swallowed by steam rising from breath, and guide them to bays now bearing chalk labels that read water level knee-deep, drain watch hourly, machine gun sightline stable. Barnes hands the new sergeant a penciled map of sap distances and crater depths, then shakes his hand in a gesture that blends sympathy with warning. As our platoon files toward the rear, engineers remain to instruct on the pump crank, sounding like farmers passing a plow to next season's tenant. I glance back once, catching the newcomers staring at the mascots, perhaps unsure whether war pets are regulation gear or local superstition. The withdrawal route bends through reserve trenches where duckboards tilt like warped piano keys. Behind us, artillery hums in languid pulses, a distant conversation we no longer need to answer. Mud gives way to rutted chalk, as we reach a sunken road lined with stunted apple trees that still manage a few brown leaves. Wilcox claims he smells blossom memory under cordite and wet wool, and for a second I believe him. A ration wagon meets us halfway, dispensing slabs of bacon fried over a proper stove, and tins of condensed milk that taste like civilized mornings. Harvey pockets an extra tin for trading, quoting an unwritten market rate of 1 tin for 2 dry socks. I record the barter value, reasoning that economists of future wars may track morale more accurately through milk and cloth than through bullets. We reached the rest billets just after noon, a cluster of stone barns patched with tar paper, roofs low enough to catch wind, yet high enough to feel like halls after dugout claustrophobia. Straw bales line the floor, smelling of mouse nests and summer long past, but the dryness alone grants them the status of luxury. Hughes dismisses parade until morning, ordering only weapon wipe down and lice inspection before sleep. Captain Socks chooses a hayloft corner, curls triumphant, while Sergeant Needles vanishes beneath the first mound he encounters, confident no man will roll on his spines. In the relative quiet, I flip my notebook to a new page, ink finally drying without smearing, and write that day 3 closes, not with thunder, but with the soft rustle of straw and the lingering taste of bacon grease, small mercies that feel enormous after nights measured by shrapnel and rain. After weapons gleam under oily cloth, we march to Barnes, over to the divisional bath unit, a trio of galvanized tubs perched on braziers that give off clouds of steam scented faintly with carbolic. Clothing is dumped into wire cages, then slid into a delousing boiler where live steam hunts the seams more thoroughly than any candle flame. While we wait our turn, the corporal in charge lectures on the life cycle of Pediculus humanus, explaining that heat above 120 degrees will burst the eggs like kernels of old maize. Men applaud the prospect of tiny explosions inside their filthy trousers, laughter echoing in rafters that once heard only cattle low. When I finally sink into the tub, the water turns the color of weak tea within seconds, yet the warmth melts mud from joints, and for a moment the war feels distant, dissolving in steam. Clean uniforms reclaim their khaki beneath. Fresh talc as we queue for pay parade outside a shuttered estaminet, now run by Corps' canteen. The paymaster counts notes that smell of printer ink and damp wallets, reminding us that soldiers remain economic units, even while shells rearrange geography. Inside, the canteen offers tins of sardines, postcards of ruined cathedrals, and weak beer that fizzes like a dying battery. Harvey buys 2 eggs at a franc each, a price that makes him wince, but he claims the taste of yolk, not powdered, is worth the ransom. Local children hover near the doorway, trading smiles for scraps of chocolate, their eyes older than their height suggests. Barnes slips a peppermint to a girl in a patched coat, noting in his log that civilian morale report improves by at least 1 sweet gram. Mid-afternoon brings an intelligence briefing in a loft, lit by pierced shell cases, repurposed as lampshades. A captain with chalk dust on his tunic describes new German stormtroop tactics. Units that creep forward in small knots to bypass strong points and seek soft belly supply lines. He prods a sand table built of flour and coffee grounds, tracing arrows that dart like ferrets through gaps. To counter, he advises deeper barbed belts and sentry pairs who alternate rest so no post blinks at the same moment. A mortar crew demonstrates the Stokes light thrower outside, its round arcing, then plopping into an empty field with a sound more comedic than lethal. Hughes remarks that even gentle thuds bury metal enough to ruin any breakfast, and the room nods, lesson absorbed through equal parts fear and dry wit. Evening settles over billets, with an amber sky that almost recalls harvest, the scent of straw mingling with frying bacon rations reclaimed from reserve stores. Wilcox writes a letter on YMCA paper describing Sergeant Needles and Captain Socks as his current commanding officers of morale. I compose my own notes summarizing lice massacres, economic theories of egg pricing, and the strategic value of never blinking in pairs. Beyond the barn door, the moon climbs, haloed by thin mist, illuminating battered wagons and rifle stacks that lean like tired sentinels, finally granted pause. A French farmer leads an old mule along the road, its hooves steady in familiar mud, and I realize the line between war and routine is sometimes as narrow as the tracks our boots leave behind. Day 3 closes with that thought, straw crackling under turning bodies, hopes tucked beside notebooks within reach of morning. Sunlight threads through cracks in the barn wall and paints golden stripes across sleeping forms. Hens clucking in the adjoining stall, providing a farmyard reveille more gentle than any bugle. We shuffle to the field kitchen, where a corporal stirs oatmeal in a copper cauldron, adding a guarded scoop of real sugar that dissolves like a treaty inside the gray mass. Captain Socks begs politely, one paw lifted in salute, earning a crust dipped in broth. Sergeant Barnes reads the company order, today class, on map reading at 10, kit inspection at 12, rest otherwise respected. Men grin at the word rest, a concept as fragile as rice paper, yet they pocket it like a coin of rare metal. I jot that hope thrives on official schedules, even when reality tends to erase lines with muddy fingers. Mid-morning finds us outside beneath a patient sun as Lieutenant Hughes explains contours and grid references on a linen sheet map, the colors faded to pastel memories. He traces a curving brown line, calls it the ridge that has traded owners thrice since spring, then quizzes Harvey, who guesses elevation by counting intervals, earning a nod and a peppermint. Wilcox wonders aloud whether hills feel affronted when claimed by flags they never invited, drawing quiet laughter. Hughes ends with a caution. Paper geography deceives. Trust compass, trust footstep, yet never trust distance measured by rumor. We fold the map like a sacred text and return to Barnes, just as a convoy of ration lorries groans past, tires spitting chalk dust that glitters before settling on our just-cleaned boots. Afternoon parade, called off after a field message, reports enemy aircraft spotted south, prompting the gunners nearby to raise barrels skyward and pepper clouds with archy bursts that bloom black, then fade like smudges on parchment. We sit along a low stone wall, watching fragments of shrapnel tumble earthward in harmless whistles. A metallic sleet that patters on slate roofs. A local boy arrives with a battered accordion and plays a waltz older than any uniform here. Notes drifting over turnip fields that remain miraculously green. Men sway, some hum, and Barnes drops 2 biscuits into the boy's cap. The weight of gratitude investing the simple tune with unexpected authority. I record that folk melodies cross trenches faster than shells, carrying news that hearts still beat in rhythm. Night returns over billets with a vault of clear stars. Orion bold above the barn ridge, his belt the same pattern that guided Hughes on last watch. The air smells of straw and distant wood smoke, a perfume that almost masks trench ghosts still clinging to boots and blankets. Captain Socks circles twice, then settles against Sergeant Needles. Truce renewed without negotiation. I sit on an upturned bucket, lamp shielded, and write final lines for this relentless day, describing map lessons, accordion diplomacy, and the odd peace granted by astronomy. As ink dries, I wonder if future classrooms will include footnotes about cats earning rank or hedgehogs holding line, tiny myths born from colossal conflict, proof that even in mud humanity sprouts stubborn green shoots. Moonlight fades, and the barn shifts with small sounds as men dream of trains that run to cities unscarred by shellfire. I remain awake long enough to hear a motor lorry grind to a halt outside. Quartermaster Cobb unloads parcels marked YMCA Comfort, each wrapped in brown paper, still dry despite the long rutted road. Inside we find shaving soap, pencils, and slabs of fruitcake dense enough to survive artillery. Barnes slices the cake like a chaplain dividing sacrament, while Hughes reads the enclosed note from schoolchildren in Ohio who collected pennies for ingredients. The letter ends with a drawing of a smiling doughboy under a flag, innocence carefully inked. The barn becomes oddly quiet as everyone eats, tasting nutmeg and raisin rather than mud for the first time in weeks. I write that sugar mixed with memory proves stronger than rum. Morning inspection begins under a sky of clean blue, the kind painters reserve for hopeful backgrounds. Hughes lines us before the barns, boots newly greased, rifles gleaming. He checks chin straps, queries the state of feet, and nods approval when Wilcox reports no fresh blisters after 2 hot water soaks. The medical orderly demonstrates proper application of whale oil, explaining that a film no thicker than paper can keep trench foot at bay when socks fail. He quotes recent studies showing moisture robs blood heat faster than frost, an invisible thief that only vigilance can repel. Barnes then produces a captured German entrenching tool, wider blade and shorter handle than ours, and invites comparison. We test its swing on a clay bank and agree the enemy design cuts quickly, yet strains wrist joints. Tools reveal philosophies. I note, some armies trust leverage, others endurance. After lunch, the company gathers near a battered cider press for impromptu target practice with captured potato mash grenades rendered inert. An engineer fills them with white chalk instead of powder, so any direct hit on the canvas screen leaves a bloom of dust. Harvey lobs the first and scores a perfect center, clouds puffing like summer flower. Barnes applauds, then reminds us that the real grenade ignites in 4 seconds, not the leisurely 6 of Allied Mills pattern, a lesson many men have learned at fatal cost. He relates a tale from Ypres where timing errors painted trenches with fragments and regret. Laughter dims, replaced by a solemn respect for seconds and springs. I write that war is a stern teacher who counts in fragments of breath and offers no retest when the clock hand slips. Late afternoon brings a surprise concert. A French liaison officer arrives with a battered violin tucked under his greatcoat. He stands atop a feed trough and tunes quickly, strings protesting, then plays a haunting rendition of Claire de Lune. Notes drift over manure scent and charcoal smoke, binding barns and battered wagons into quiet theater. Men sit on ammunition crates, eyes half closed, while Captain Socks curls at the violinist's feet, tail twitching in time. When the final chord fades, Hughes removes his cap and thanks the musician in careful French, promising that music crossed the wire more often than patrols ever will. The officer bows, pockets a tin of sardines as payment, and departs toward the setting sun. I record the scene word for word, certain that some future listener will struggle to believe war allowed such fragile beauty among shattered timbers. Night creeps back, cooler now, the barn lantern casting long amber pillars across straw. Barnes announces that tomorrow we march 8 miles to a reserve trench for labor duty, filling shell holes and extending plank roads. Groans rise, then subside, duty accepted like weather. Wilcox folds his letter, sealing it with candle wax dripped from the lamp, and hands it to the runner bound for field post. Harvey sharpens his pocket knife against a spent shell rim, planning to carve new chess pieces from cider press scraps. Captain Sock's dreams on his side, paws twitching, perhaps chasing phantom rats beyond gun range. Sergeant Needles snores within a nest of sock rags, barbs muted by wool. I close the notebook, counting that day 3 has filled 36 entries, more than 36 reasons to remember how a single rotation can stretch centuries inside the mind, yet still end in silence, broken only by distant guns and the rustle of straw breathing under weary men. First light seeps through barn slats, and Hughes calls us to movement with a whistle that slices the chill air. Packs thump onto shoulders, rifles sling, and the column files out along a cart track bordered by hedges, stripped bare by autumn shell shock. Frost clings to grass blades like tiny bayonets, yet the sun promises thaw. Captain Socks trots ahead, scouting puddles while Sergeant Needles rides in Harvey's greatcoat pocket, his quills rhythmically poking like a silent metronome. We keep a steady pace, 8 miles to the reserve line, mud sucking at boots in steady applause. Along the verge stands a lone crucifix, scarred by fragments, its wooden Christ missing an arm but still gazing east, a quiet reminder that divine oversight here often arrives short-handed. Barnes notes the landmark for maps, salvation by cartography. We reach the labor trench near midday, a shallow zigzag cut through blasted beet fields where water lies, black and placid. Engineers hand out shovels, scarred from prior campaigns, each blade stamped with a year that feels like ancient history, although barely 3 seasons have passed. Our task is simple in description: backfill shell pits so carts can roll artillery forward. Yet the pits resemble lunar craters, their rims glazed with ice so clear it mirrors the blue sky in warped fragments. Wilcox leads a chain gang passing wicker gabions that we drop into the void, then shovel chalk and clay until the basket vanishes. Sweat steams off coats despite the thin air. Hughes times each rotation, urging careful pacing, reminding us that haste breeds twisted ankles, which medicine cannot afford this month. During a short break, a French widow arrives with a wheelbarrow stacked with bottles of cider salvaged from a ruined cellar. She trades each bottle for a few tins of bully beef, an economy that seems harsh yet fair in a world where protein outvalues memory. Barnes buys 2, passes 1 to the work detail, and the amber liquid slides down throats like bottled sunshine. The widow thanks us in quiet Breton and points toward a distant thicket where her goats now forage among barbed wire, a living map of stubborn survival. I sketch her barrow, the dented bottles, the shadow of a once grand farmhouse outlined against distant smoke, and wonder how many histories spill unnoticed into this churned soil each time a shell lands. Shell warning whistles shriek mid-afternoon, and we dive behind a lip of fresh fill, just as 3 German 88s whistle in walked explosions, lift curtains of mud that splash across our barricade, peppering helmets with gravel flak. When dust clears, Sergeant Needles peers from Harvey's coat, whiskers quivering in offended surprise. while Captain Socks growls at the fading echo, tail puffed like a chimney sweep brush. Engineers assess damage, declare the new roadbed mostly intact, and praise the Gabions for earning their keep. Hughes orders a quick lesson on shell crater first aid, demonstrating how scooped walls can serve as instant splints when manpower runs thin. We listen grimly, then return to shovels, each thrust a vote for tomorrow's road to exist. Dusk bleeds lavender over the plain, and relief squads arrive, so we can march back to billets 2 miles north, boots heavier with wet clay that smells of iron and old roots. At the barn, the field kitchen serves lentil stew alive with pepper, and a chaplain distributes thin booklets of psalms in French and English, pages designed to fit breast pockets over beating hearts. Captain Socks curls near the brazier, paws twitching in dreams of unlimited bacon, while Sergeant Needles claims a sheltered corner atop a crate of spare webbing. Barnes enters last, records the day's labor tonnage, then announces mail arrival at dawn. I close my notebook after 8 new pages, muscles humming from honest toil rather than terror, and note that even under shell threat, the act of building, of leveling paths for wheels not yet turned, grants a peculiar flavor of hope, coarse yet sustaining like trench bread, thick with weevils, but still, undeniably, bread.